see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
What unites people? Armies, gold, flags, stories. There's nothing in the world more powerful than a good story. Nothing can stop it.
If you want to stand out from everybody else, you need to get into storytelling.
Draw a different frame around the same set of circumstances and new pathways come into view.
Welcome to Artefact Live with me, Scott MacArthur, where we look at the art and science of story. We don't care who you are, whether you're a bricklayer, a professor or a speaker, all we care about is you being a good storyteller.
Thank God the drummers arrived.
It's time to realise that facts tell, but it's stories that sell.
Get me some nasty and get it now or someone's getting shot.
And that's a niche of a niche of a niche of a niche of a 1,000 comments.
Selling a hemorrhoid cream to someone who's got hemorrhoids.
Got a whip.
I was born into a deep contradiction.
This stuff's magic.
Oh, that's so clever.
Hello and welcome to Artefact Live with me, Scott MacArthur. Now, it's been a few weeks since I've been on. It's been a consequence of my health, unfortunately. So I've not been very well, but I'm feeling a bit better today. So I thought I'd get on and start to open the new chapter in what we're doing with Artefact Live. Now, I believe that what we've been doing for 63 weeks has been good work. And I'm dead excited about what we've learned and the guests we've had and the sort of approach we've taken. But when I wasn't very well, I was thinking about, well, you know, what's the next chapter going to look like? And I've been thinking about this for a while and thinking about how do I bring this even more to life for everybody? Because what we've done, and I think this is all we've done, is we've laid a foundation. We've started to help people understand why facts tell, but it's stories that sell. We've started to explain how a good story acts as an empathy engine. So for all of those reasons, I'm excited about moving it to the next chapter. And that's about, well, I'm not quite sure what it's about, and that's quite exciting as well. But what I did want to do was I didn't want to continue to do this on my own. I've always had guests, and that's been terrific, but I wanted to have somebody with me, somebody that could be a co-host on the show. There's a number of reasons for that. One is I've been sitting in this studio for 2 years doing over 400 hours of live broadcasting on my own. And it does get a wee bit weird spending all your time in a little studio like this. So I thought, well, one thing I'd like to do is, you know, ask someone along just for company and to build ideas with. And the build ideas bit with is the main part. And it's what we're going to focus on today, because the way my brain works, it's not the way well, I think it probably is the way the brain works. And we can ask my co-presenter in a minute what he thinks about this. But the way my brain works is that I can read, I'm surrounded by books. You can't see them, but they're here. I'm surrounded by books. I read probably 2 or 3 books every week, mainly by audio, I have to say, but I do open the pages of the wonderful paper sometimes. I listen to maybe half a dozen podcasts every week. So I do a lot of learning, and it's from that learning that a lot of the things spark. You know, I go from one idea to another, then I form a constellation and an idea comes out of that. But it's even better if you're doing it with company. It's even better if you're working with another human brain, because there's nothing quite like natural intelligence and natural stupidity to really help you come up with something creative and something new. So that's the logic behind all of this. So just before I introduce my new co-presenter, unfortunately, the chat's not working on Restream today. So When we're talking, I will check the chat on the platforms, but it's not working today on LinkedIn or on Facebook. And I can see there's a good few of you on LinkedIn already. So I will nip across there and check it periodically. So won't be quite as slick as normal, but that's probably quite fitting for the show we're going to have today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to my new co-host, Mr. Paul Crick. Hello. I can't hear you, Paul. I can't hear you. Hold on.
There you go.
That's it. Hello.
See, when the private chat's open, you can't unmute yourself.
Is that right?
Yeah, first lesson.
Never knew that. That's something to know about. All right, okay. Welcome to Artifact Live.
Yes, I'm glad you got me for my, was it intelligence or my stupidity? I'm not sure.
Well, we could talk
not
about
doing
that
too well so far.
I like both.
Good.
I think it's what separates us from the artificial intelligence. They haven't quite cottoned on to the fact they need to design artificial stupidity as well. If technology is ever going to be as creative as human beings.
I think that's true. Well, I think AI is doing a good enough job on its own, actually.
That'll be the humans behind it more likely. But,
well, I'm not going there. It's too early in the show.
No. So
how are you?
I'm okay. I, as I said to you earlier, and I haven't said to the audience, I didn't feel like doing the show yesterday. I was in my bed most of the day yesterday, but today I got up and poor Paul. I think, when did I text you? 2 hours ago.
Yeah.
That was for the pre-production meeting.
We're always prepared.
Yes, indeed. That's one of the things about being ex-consultants, isn't it?
I believe so. Yes.
You've always got to be ready. So, but no, I'm fine, and I'm quite excited about doing this. And
okay,
everybody, hey, do you see my new microphone, Paul? Look, new microphone.
Oh, what's one of those?
It's one of those Shure things.
It's got some flashy lights on. I like things
It
with
does,
flashy
and
lights
it does.
on.
It's automatic. Like you can mute it automatically, without touching the keyboard, so you get less interference. Apparently.
Oh, right. Okay.
Don't know what I'm talking about. Like. But no, I decided that because Paul and I are going to make this into a podcast, I had okay sound, Paul, but I just wanted to make it a little bit better.
Yeah.
A little bit more flexible. So that's why I went and invested in a new microphone. So
sounds like a plan.
Right. So what we're going to talk about today? Well, first of all, if you don't mind, could you give everyone a feel for how you got to here, what you've been through, and listen, take your time. It doesn't need to be a quick. I'm not after a quick CV here. I want to.
You don't want an elevator pitch
about you, and I mean, the first thing I'll just say something about how we met. I mean, we met doing one of these things, didn't we?
We did. Oh my God!
There he is.
That was back in the day. Look at that haircut.
It was 2 years ago.
I know.
It feels like a million years ago, doesn't it?
It does. Yes.
But we met that day, and our subjects weren't the same, but we definitely resonated, didn't we? So that's how we came across one another, and of course that's ended up in our friendship. So it's one of the great things about the TEDx movement is you get into this intense experience with 15 other speakers, and it does create opportunities for friendship. It's quite exciting, really, isn't it?
It is. I've loved it, and I've loved how, as a group, we've kind of more or less stayed in touch with most of the group.
Pretty much, yeah.
One way or another. So cheering each other along as we make progress one step at a time. Yeah,
absolutely. I wouldn't mind coming back to that if we get a chance. We might not get a chance today. But anyway, so tell us all about yourself.
Right. Well, like most people, I was born at a very early age, and I was I'm a Scouser by birth originally, although you wouldn't know it, and spent most of my teenage years on the COP. So I'm from the red half of Liverpool, where I was born.
Right, okay.
But as anyone who knows Liverpool, the blue and the red can exist peacefully and happily side by side. So that's a good thing. So yeah, I was what would be called a woolly back on the COP, which is basically Scouse for sheep, because I lived on the Wirral, which is most Scousers regard as countryside or the posh end, and they occasionally you see people with comments that say, yeah, we ought to brick the Mersey Tunnel up and keep them away. But no, I was one of those. And so school, I was more into sport than I was into academics. I didn't really bloom into thinking until much later in life. So hockey, soccer, a big love of music. So
Yes.
picked up, had my first piano lesson when I was 3.
Wow.
Was doing grade 7, quite young, and a couple of hours practice a day. So I'm glad that's never left me.
Great.
But of course, teenage years arrived, and peer pressure arrived, and other distractions. So I was hoping for the call to be the 5th member of Led Zeppelin, but you know what? It never came, strangely enough.
It might yet.
No, I doubt it. Not if they know what's good for them. So yeah, I became a big fan of rock music, and that kind of consumed my life, going to Skeleton Records in Birkenhead and doing that, sort of sorting through the record racks, which
Magic.
I sometimes miss. So it's great when you discover it. In fact, there's a shop in Hay on Wye. It's one of the few that I know of that you can still do that. You can wander in, and it's an independent record store selling all kinds of vinyl, which is just fabulous. So big love of that. Ended up with A levels that were less than impressive. I think I underwhelmed most of my teachers, except my music teacher. He was still impressed with me to a degree. So I ended up going up to Polytechnic to do business, because most of the advice they didn't know what to do with me. I wasn't going to go to Oxbridge. I wasn't going to go down the obvious route of either engineering or medical science in some way, shape or form, even though I enjoyed those subjects. So I ended up going up to Preston Poly, did the classic rebel against my parents thing. So hair long, leather jackets, loud rock music, and nearly failed my first year spectacularly. And had a word with my course counsellor had a word with me rather than the other way around, that said, if you want to, what do you want to do, lad? And I said, I want to go to university. And they said, well, you better pull your bloody socks up. So I did. And I ended up at UMIST and did. And by this time, I was starting to get into I understood what reading for a degree meant, and I actually enjoyed that process. Right. But I think it was more that I was getting A grades and good grades. And a bit like a puppy, when you throw a puppy a treat, it's kind of wags its tail and go, can I have some more, please? So I enjoyed all that. Left university with pretty good grades, and ended up working in a software house, really honestly trying to learn to wear a suit and not be too wet behind the ears, but failed miserably. And then ended up, so I wanted to go down the marketing route. Ended up at Barclays, did some work for them in direct marketing, and this was a time pre-Google. And it was still at a time when the way you requested accounts from a computer was you sent a note to the secretary, and they typed it up. They sent it down to the data processing center in the internal mail. And then you get, this is how old I am, Scott. Yeah. And then they'd send you a printout, which was sort of that green and white line stuff.
I remember that,
yeah. And then on the basis of that, you make some decisions as to. So I was very early into that. And in some respects, that really stood me most of my career. I was also lucky in that we were re-engineering the loan product processing system. So I learned how to do information engineering, which is how do you do a logical design of a relational database, which was great in later life, because people would look at you and go, how do you know that? You're a marketeer. It's like, well, yeah, I did a whole project for 9 months on how to do this. And it was handy. So my career was built around information engineering and essentially just trying to learning how to make money out of data, and showing people basically how to save money. Then I ended up in consulting, having done an MBA at Henley, which was great. I was lucky. I was sponsored to do that, and then I ended up in consulting, your old patch.
Yeah.
And as I say now, I'm a recovering management consultant. I could murder a PowerPoint slide to within an inch of its life, and was able to read faster than my clients. Yeah. In terms of that, but I joke. It's a very privileged existence in some ways, because you get to work with some amazing people who are way, way smart, or certainly in my case, way, way smarter than me, and clients that are just brave and brilliant in allowing you to go into their business and try and help them. So, got to travel all over the world. Very lucky in the sense that I also then started to get interested in what most people perhaps listening or watching this would say are soft skills, but they're anything but. And was lucky to be invited as a part-time tutor from time to time on various courses. Fell in love with that. Then 2007 arrived and I turned my life upside down is probably the short version of the story, and I won't bore you with the rest of it. But that led me into coaching, and I started with neurolinguistic programming, which when you're new to it, the underpinnings of it are great. The way it was taught, the way it was sold, not so happy with that these days, and it lacked sufficient research base. However, phenomenologically, it works. I know because and whether that's placebo effect or whether it's for real, as I go through, I kind of go, well, it doesn't really matter. If the client gets the result they came for, then that's, to some extent, that's what matters. Yes. But through there, went into energy psychology because there were certain things that weren't working in the NLP world. So I'd opened up a sort of private practice, which was evenings and weekends. And, a client would come with an issue and I couldn't help them because something wouldn't work and I couldn't understand why. So some teachers would say, well, that's because your client's being inflexible and it's their problem. And I'm scratching my head going, I don't think it is. I think there's something I don't know yet. And that took me on a journey down into learning how to be a psychotherapist. So I was lucky. I did a course in contemporary psychotherapy. And the beauty of that was you got to study the main modalities and then compare and contrast them all. And what you learn at the end of that is, as well as learning the idiosyncrasies and the attributes of each one, but you learn that they're all essentially different coloured doors, but they all lead to the same room. And they try to do the same thing. So that's quite interesting. Then I went back into IBM. They were kind enough to take me on a second time. And then I found my way into becoming an accredited coach. And now, long story short, that's what I do in my own right, working with teams in technology-driven businesses, trying to help them be better teams, do better things, make things better, as Seth would say, by making better things.
Yes. Yeah,
there you go.
Excellent. Right, can you do this next bit, please?
Right. What would you like me to do?
It's quite interesting that because we've had not a dissimilar background, haven't we? Not dissimilar.
Well, I think there's a number of common touch points. The consulting. We've got a love of music and similar, different taste in music, but also lots of overlap as well.
Yes,
so that's made conversations fun and interesting.
So, I think the bit that jumped out there, and it's not for discussion really, just to make the point to those that are watching and listening. Don't know about you folks, but when Paul mentioned the doors, the different colour doors leading to the same place, didn't that just work? It was really, really interesting when you hear someone talking about whatever it is they're talking about, Paul. It's those little metaphors and stories that make things clear, isn't it? I don't know how you feel about that, but that's how when you were telling that whole story, that was the bit, boom, yeah, got that.
Well, it used to annoy me when I was studying psychotherapy. You get someone in the press or in some, and they'd say, oh, CBT is rubbish and it's this, that, and the other. Well, it isn't. It works. It's probably one of the most efficacious forms, but it's, sometimes it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And psychodynamic works. Some parts of psychodynamic have been discredited.
Yes.
But, as we were speaking just before we came on, Copernicus showed that, the earth goes around the sun, not the other way around. And we all moved on with a version of the truth. Yeah. And that's what I like contemporary thinking that says this was right at this point in time. Now let's move on. And can we stop throwing rocks at each other?
Yes.
And just figure out what the similarities are and what can we learn from that? I'm trying hard to do that. Sometimes I fail miserably in my own biases and whatever get in the way, and I shout at people. But I think that there is a lot, and it's interesting because we reduce everything, because we do this Newtonian reductionism thing that says, we've got to study smaller and smaller bits. We forget the big picture.
Yeah.
And I think there's a need. Ian McGilchrist talks about this. We've gone down the left brain route and forgotten about the right brain. Actually, we need to work both parts together. But that's for another conversation, I think.
Yeah. Do you think that's why many people, and you and I are definitely in this box, are drawn to poetry as well as music?
I think poetry is, so if you said to me at 20 I would love poetry the way I love it now, what poetry does is it uses language, for me at least, it uses language in a way that interrupts patterns.
Yeah.
And uses a wordsmithing that goes, I would never have thought it like that. But it's so beautiful. And some of it's dry and it doesn't resonate with me. And other bits of it are just they just knock you on your backside.
Yes.
And you go, oh, that's what a beautiful way to look at the world.
Yes. I remember, and I think I've told this story before, we both enjoy the work of David White.
Very much so.
And I was very lucky to have a drink with him one night. And I was it was a Cotswold hotel not far from where I live, and everyone else had gone to bed. And to be honest, it was all women except me, David, and one other chap. That was it. And everyone else was female. They'd all gone to bed. I don't know why I mentioned that, but it was an interesting dynamic. Anyway, and we're sitting having a chat with rather large glasses of red wine, and I think we're probably on our second one or our third one. And I said to him, David, can I be honest about something? And he looked, you know what he's like. He looked at me and he went, well, yes, of course. You know, and I can't copy his voice. He said, yeah, of course. I said, I don't really understand quite a lot of your poetry. And there was a pause, and you could hear the crackling in the fire and nothing else. And he took a drink and then he went, neither do I. And that really helped me, because he's not quite a stream of consciousness poet like Jack Kerouac or, you know, Allen Ginsberg, but he says what he feels and thinks in the moment, and it doesn't always make sense. And I love that. And I think that for me has helped me see things in a different way on the meta scale, you know, on the big scale.
Yep.
Because I used to be, I suspect, like you, I was very, very boring. You know, I was like, well, if you're not doing anything, if it's not scientific, I'm not interested, you know. And to some extent, there's a bit in my brain still thinks that's right. But then you look at the sides, you know, and things like, you know, if you look at religion, which is an incredibly complex and difficult subject, but look at the sides, you know, Mahatma Gandhi, you know, Nelson Mandela. There's some good players on that side, and why does it have to be a side? You know, so I think for me that poetry helped me crack into those, what another scientist called magisteria, you know, these other areas, and I think it's become very, very dear to me. And I think every single speech I give now I use poetry.
Yeah, I've started to do the same thing for the same reasons, because I want people to. I remember I was lucky to be asked to a Women in Tech thing that IBM had sponsored, and I finished off with a Orion Mountain Dreamers, the invitation. Brilliant. And it all went silent. Now I'm not sure if it was for the right reason. I hope so. But we were talking about, you know, the role of females in technology, or essentially typically male-dominated environments. So it just seemed the right thing to try and pick and make people think. And I think that's what it does for me. It makes me think, and I love that. And they have an ability to express things in ways that I just couldn't do. So I'm always grateful when a poet shows me something I hadn't thought of, or gives me that insight that says, oh, there's a different way to think about it.
Well, as another great poet said once in an interview, I think we've reached a threshold moment. You know, I think we on this show, because as I said in the introduction, you know, I think what we've done is we've set the foundation for everybody. And if you're watching and you haven't seen earlier shows, www.youtube.com/Scott MacArthur, and you'll find the 64 shows there. And boy, there's some cracking guests, absolutely, including this man here. But amazing when I've got everything from the world's leading Mars engineer to musicians to other poets to a forklift truck driver who's written 10 books about the Carpenters, who we met at TEDx. And I want to take that to the next level now with you, Paul, because this is a threshold moment for me personally, because I've been thinking about it for ages. But what are we going to do with this show? What direction would you like us to take into the next 60 episodes? There's a question.
Is that for me or for the audience? Says he.
That's for you, mate.
Oh, thank you very much.
What do we think? I mean, where do we want to take this? What's your thoughts?
So I think I heard this the other day, and I've forgotten where I heard it, but someone was talking about the fact that we have entered this age of fractional attention. Yeah, we all walk around with mobile phones and devices. We respond to messages, this, that, and the other, and if you're not necessarily aware of it, and even if you are, your attention is easily broken by things. But the point they were making is that means we've lost the art of nuance, and we live in a society that is increasingly polarized into right and wrong. And I don't think there is right and wrong. I think there's nuances in between.
Yes.
And I think, and this is where storytelling comes into play. And it's the art of telling the better story that persuades people to think differently. And I think, we're encouraged not to think. We're encouraged not to be creative. We're encouraged and educated to be cogs in wheels and to be compliant and obedient. And I understand why. I understand where that's come from. I understand why we want it. What that social contract is, and I get it. But I think we live in a place now where we all need to think about, well, what is the social contract that we should be negotiating for ourselves, and then as a collective. So I wonder if there are opportunities to revisit ideas and say, well, what does that mean now? So work is a great one, because everybody's talking about Great Resignation. Everybody's trying to figure out what's the right version of hybrid? How do you make hybrid work? All that kind of stuff. And people are questioning, well, what's the purpose of work? And if you're working in a commercial setting, is it all about short term? I think there's lots of scope there for a great conversation to build and say, well, and to gather a picture of, well, what are all the different doors we could walk through, and where do they lead? Yeah. And do they all lead to the same place? Because I wonder too, if really, they say it's hard to hate people close up. Irrespective of where you are in the world, what your background is, whether you're male, female, whatever your race, whatever the protected difference is, it's hard when you're in someone's face to do that, and you start to see what's common. And I think we're in a place where our common humanity needs to come to the fore. Yeah, it's fun to throw rocks sometimes, and we've all done it. We all enjoy it, but if you look at the issues and the challenges that we face, then we need us to pull together. Otherwise, we are on a slippery slope that we won't like the consequences. And it might not happen in yours and my lifetime, but it certainly will in the next one. For children and grandchildren. And I think we have a responsibility to some degree to talk about that. So in my mind, it's to say, okay, how do we find waypoints to start from? To take so if we go back to things like 1452, where the burning of witches and women started, the start of the subjugation of women. If we go to the beginning of the Renaissance, what happened there? What cracked that open? What did crack that open? Because I get the sense that we are at a tipping point, and if you listen to one group of media commentators, they say, "Oh, it's the most dangerous time in the world, and we're 1 foot away from disaster.
We're all doomed.
We're all doomed." And you're right. And then there's the other side, which actually isn't this the most exciting place to be, to kind of reinvent things? And how do we do that? And how do we think through that? So how do we think through things like this idea of a standard income for people,
Yes.
and what that really means and who that benefits, and think that all the way through, and then who's got vested interests and how do we help. The story, one of my favorite stories, is about the guardian lions in Kenya and Dr. Leela Hazar's work. If you could bottle what she's done and go and take that round society, I think you'd see some changes, because she worked with the Masai Mara. Do you know this story? Because if you do,
I do know the story, yeah.
Yeah. So very briefly, she worked with the Masai Mara, and to become a warrior, it was a rite of passage for a young male in the Masai Mara tribe. They live in villages. The villages are protected by vegetation and fences that the tribe has built, but they're breached by lions, who then kill the livestock, which is their source of food. So the rite of passage was to go and kill a lion. And when you killed the lion, you picked your lion, you named your lion, you went and killed it. You got to display the lion in the village. You got bragging rights. You then became a man, and everything that went with that. What she did was she managed to infiltrate the tribe, and show them that first tracking lions was more profitable because it brought tourists in. Therefore, it brought money to the village. Therefore, the village could afford more. Therefore, they could live better, less of a subsistent lifestyle. That was the first thing. Second of all, in the rite of passage to being a warrior was you got to look after one or more lions, and instead of you naming the lion and then you taking the lion because you killed it, it was the other way around. It was like your name was given to the lion. That's you. So don't tell that. And essentially, it got to a point where they were protecting the lions, they were earning the money. The rite of passage was to become a warrior, was to protect a lion. And the thing that really nailed it for me was the villagers realized that the lions weren't encroaching on the villagers' land. Actually, the villagers were borrowing the lions' land. And that switch of lens is what I sense we all need to do around a whole host of topics, to say, how do we do that? So I'd love to see the show. I'd love people to suggest topics that we start with, and then invite a conversation, and we'll go and find, if we can't generate a conversation ourselves, then I'm sure we can, but we can go and find people to contribute to that, to give a view and to become a repository of inspiring conversation.
Lovely. I feel quite excited about that idea.
That's a relief.
Yeah. Because it's true though, isn't it? I mean, just to reflect a little bit on it, I see all the time on LinkedIn in particular, it's become I don't get very much out of it. Mm-hmm. Is the best way to put it, I guess, without being rude about it. But if that is a reflection of humanity, and I don't believe it is,
no,
then it would be a very sad place we live in, because there's no intellectual engagement on that platform. I don't know if there's any intellectual engagement anywhere. Well, there is. That's not fair. On the radio, there's still very good shows, and there's a lot of very good quality
podcasts. Lectures
podcasts.
Are great, and things like that.
Exactly. And you've got, Brain Pickings and On Being and all these wonderful places that are full of people genuinely trying to have that sort of dialogue. But is it there in the business world, Paul? I don't know. I think the short-termism and the reporting to the various cities and the financial construct of these places make it very difficult for people. I mean, people are very, you and I are very lucky. We've met these people. We know how good they are, mm-hmm. But they very rarely get engaged in a program that will not finish until long after their careers have finished. And that is quite depressing when you think about it as a grown-up. Very few people in corporate, because the corporations, certainly in my view, they're the ones that change the world, not the governments. It's the people and the corporations that they work in that can change the world, not governments.
And I think what's interesting is the Edelman Trust report is sort of pointing to that. If you look at how trust has sort of dropped off in the last couple of years, CEOs and business are seen as the engine of, not the saviors, but that the engine of getting us out of this. There's more. There isn't a lot of trust, but there's more than in the other
Yeah.
public institutions. So I
Yes.
think there's that opportunity, and it's figuring out that Leela Hazar thing. What's the payoff?
Yeah.
That we need to. You can still be a warrior,
Mm.
and you can still have all the stuff that goes with it. But what is it you need to do differently that's better?
Yes.
That still gives you that status. We all have a need for status in some way, shape, or form. That's okay.
Yeah.
We have ego. That's what helps drive progress.
Yes.
One of the energies, certainly. So I think, I think you're right. The business world needs to go through the Masai Mara experience to say how do we help people do that, and who goes first?
Yes.
I think that's an interesting
That's
question.
a really interesting question. Who goes first?
Who goes first? Because we're all arguing about fossil fuel oil, and the evidence from the IPCC is clear. So someone needs to go first.
Yes. But that's going to be, if we learn anything from history, those that go first often, I mean, speak to Mr. Ford or Van Gogh, or, I guess there are lots of failures, which is not a bad thing. But I think the word courage has become a word that, thanks to the likes of Brené Brown and stuff, has become part of the lexicon. I'm not sure it's in the boardroom, but it's certainly amongst the sort of the thoughtful end of people that work in companies, or just people. But it's going to be interesting to see where it goes, because again, you look at the LinkedIn world and it's full of people selling rockets, as always. I've got the best rocket, boom. Next, boom. It's not sustainable. But I don't know the answer. I don't know if anyone knows the answer.
Well, I think it's interesting because there are some potential answers, but that people have explored. So there's a little part of me that says, I'm not sure we were designed. The life we live is the life we were designed to live.
Yeah.
All this stuff of progress, and there are clearly parts of it progress. The advances in human health and that we've seen in some parts of the world, but not in others. But concreting everything over, building stuff, not making it sustainable. A decision is a very interesting thing, because actually making a decision, it's just binary, yes or no.
Yeah.
It's all the stuff that goes into it, and what are the consequences, and how do I look, and what does that mean for me, and where's my bonus coming? As one sales director once said to me, if it doesn't contribute to my bonus, then I'm not doing it. And there was a little bit of me that wanted to punch him, and then there was a little bit of me that felt some compassion for him, because I thought, well, yeah, I get that. So the issue is the system. So I think there are some systemic views that we need to take, which are really interesting. You look at how nature organizes it. So go for a walk in the woods.
Yeah.
We don't need any diversity and inclusion in there, because it just happens. We don't need to make room for people. It just works.
Yes.
And it doesn't require any intervention from us, because we're actually part of it. So
yes,
looking at through that lens, and there's some people that aren't taught about nature, that if you showed them some things about the countryside, they go, oh, what's that? And you go, well, what do you mean a cockerel doesn't? My wife and I were laughing the other night, and we were saying, there's probably some kids out there that, why is it we have to say hens lay eggs? And it's for the people that don't know that hens lay eggs.
yes.
And you kind of look at it and you go, okay, so what's happening here? And how do we contribute to turning the ship? I mean, it's not that you and I sort of put our capes on and go, right, we're going to fix it like Superman and Spider-Man.
I like a cape.
You look like a cape, yes. Yes, I could get my keyboards out and pretend I'm Rick Wakeman.
Exactly, Rick in the corner.
But it's how do we mobilize small groups of people to be willing to go left when everyone else is going right? And how do you create protection for them?
Yes.
And where are the vested interests that are protecting themselves because they get paid, or they get some status out of it? or it maintains power, or something like that.
Got an observation here for us to think about from Derek. Hello,
Mhm.
Derek. Thanks for tuning in. Corporates and public sector rarely engage with anything with a time to repay of more than 5 years. Yeah. Yet there are a small number of people who will engage and provide funds for these things. Thanks for that, Derek. It kind of, for me, that it does reinforce what we were talking about earlier. What do you think of that?
I've seen too many businesses. I've built too many business cases that try to prove the numbers and do all that thing. And the reality is, there's too many active ingredients to actually make a business case land. Yes. And if you're chasing a dividend promise and a bonus that goes with it, then some of that is window dressing.
Yes.
And you find other ways of getting to the same result. And yes. I've seen all of that. And I think if you're in the public sector, then you're driven by the politics and the fact that you're paid because you're a paid public servant. And yes. I don't know. There's a certain. I always remember watching Yes Minister when it first came out years and years and years ago, and I never got it. I was like, well, what's funny about this? And then I was a consultant in the public sector for about 4 years, and I went, oh, now I see. And it's not the people sitting in the front line providing the service. They're awesome. They really do amazing things. But it's some of the stuff that happens in the systemic piece of that you kind of go, okay, yeah, I get it. Turkeys aren't going to vote for Christmas. But we need to find a way out, because if we don't, we just keep doing the same thing. And sure enough, we're going to end up where everybody's telling us we're going to end up. And then you can't get to a point, I don't think, where someone chops the last tree down on the Easter Island and goes, oh shit, we shouldn't have done that. Yeah.
Ignore history at your peril.
Quite.
I had just yesterday, I was having a call with the HR director of a major corporate who has just booked me to do a keynote.
Nice.
And what she didn't know was that I started my career with that company. And in fact, I was on the group that broke the company up to form the company that she's now on the board of.
Brilliant.
Very well-known company. And but what really made me laugh, and I struggled not to laugh, when I was there, and this is now best part of 30 years ago, not quite, but nearly 30 years ago, we were going through a massive reorganization program like had never happened in this particular industry before. And she said yesterday, we're going through a massive reorganization program that's never happened in this industry before. And I just thought, oh God, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
They do indeed.
And it's fascinating when you see that, the reality of that. And I think Derek's point there is that often that inability to actually change is because of those timeframes. So yeah, that would be it would be really interesting if anyone's out there in the city who's an investor. I mean, I know some, I don't know if you know any, I know some venture capital guys. I don't know if I know anybody who's actually in the city having an impact on the reports for companies anymore. I used to, but I think he's out of there now. Be quite interesting to get a city perspective on it, wouldn't it?
It would, yes, because particularly with BlackRock and some of their pronouncements of recent years, you wonder is that just blackwash, or is it something that's really really happening? Although it's interesting the reaction of companies to the conflict in Ukraine at the moment, and they've been quite decisive. And you have to say, well, that can't be just PR. That has to be people taking real action. And in some ways, that's hopeful. Yes.
So, there was spoken for 45 minutes already. Maybe this needs to be the first 3-hour weekly podcast.
There you go.
But one of the things that I've tested, Paul, I've tested it, was that I started. There's always been 3 questions I've asked people. What's your favourite story? Could you bring an artifact along and talk about it and describe why? I still think these are these are good. I'm open to changing it, but I still think these are quite good questions. But there's a third question I've started to ask everybody, and it doesn't take away from the free flow of structure of it. I think we need to keep that, because I think we've just proven it works. But the final question I think I'd like to start asking people is, when was the last time you changed your mind? And the reason for that is, well, hopefully it's obvious, but I really want to understand the relationship between story, data, beliefs, behaviors, all that. It's really complicated, as you said at the beginning, but sometimes you just got to do stuff. And I think, the way I say it to clients now is, the word rational. And for decades, we've been talking about we need to be more rational. Well, the word rational has the word ratio in it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the ratio between the different perspectives. In complex issues, people tell you, I don't like people who are certain. It drives me nuts. When somebody's certain about anything, I know they don't know what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're 22.
Yeah, I remember being 22. Yeah.
But what I would like to understand is how somebody tipped, maybe from, if you look at a really, one of the issues that even though I don't like it, I could have argued for Brexit, maybe not quite as well, but nearly as well as I could argue against Brexit. There were two sides to the story.
Mm-hmm. There always is.
There always is. And I want to meet people or hear people talk about, I was pro Brexit, now I'm anti Brexit, or I'm not sure. Maybe we need both. I really want to get into that dialogue. Does that make sense?
That makes absolute sense. I think it's a really rich seam of interesting perspectives for people to bring to the table. I'd love to hear some of that, and we can start from any point on the compass to do that. Whether it's Brexit, whether it's something else.
Yeah,
fantastic.
Well, the one I changed my mind on, which I can't believe, not me, other people would look at me and say, I can't believe he's done this, is I used to be quite a strong follower of the sort of anti-nuclear power brigade. Mm-hmm. All the waste and all the issues and all the rest of it. I ain't anymore, because the technology has changed so much that it's tipped my perspective on it. The average contemporary nuclear power station creates less than a sugar cube of waste, and that gets recycled. So the whole issue that we used to all worry about, and it was something to worry about, it wasn't trivial, what to do with the waste, that has not gone, but it's virtually gone.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's economical and because it doesn't damage the environment, I'm persuaded by it. I'm now of the view, we need it. And it's quite funny that the Scottish government just talks, a lot of the time, but she blurted out this week that they're not going to do nuclear power, and I just don't agree with it. And the country in Scotland's now covered by a forest of these horrible windmills, and we could take them all down and put up small nuclear power plants that would take away all of that and stop damaging the countryside, because that's what they're doing at the moment. But I know that's contentious, and that's fine, because then you can have a dialogue.
Yeah, no, I'd love to do that, because I'm still stuck in, well, we're just doing, we've got these rods of nuclear fuel that get buried at the bottom of the sea.
Yeah.
How can that? So I don't know enough. I'm more than willing to be out. Whereas before, I'd be like, don't talk rubbish, And I think that's what we need to do, is we need to learn to. I've forgotten who said it, but it's the ability to hold two sides of the argument in your brain. That's the sign of intelligence, and then make a decision.
Yes. This is going to be fun, mate.
I want people to engage in this, because these conversations need to happen all over the place right now.
Yes. So just a reminder to everybody, you're listening to Artefact Live with me, Scott MacArthur.
And me, Paul Crick.
Where we look at the power and the agency that is in stories and storytelling. So to end, I think I'd like anyone out there who's watching, and I'm actually delighted there's quite a few people watching, Paul. I didn't think anybody would be watching today, because I didn't warn them.
Great.
If you're out there and you have a topic, as Paul mentioned earlier, let us know, because it doesn't matter how hard it is, because we're not going to pretend we know the answers, but we might know someone who can help us have a better idea about what the answers are, and we can invite them on the show to talk about their story and how they got to it. I'm delighted to say I've been talking to Perry Timms this morning, who's one of the leading influencers in the human resources space. You probably know,
I know
know
the
Perry.
name.
I thought you might have, Paul. And he's agreed to come on the show, so that'll be we can talk to him a little bit about the sort of how he sees the future of work going. And that'll be interesting because he's an influencer in that space, and it'll be cool to talk to Perry about that. So thanks, Perry, if you're watching, for agreeing to come on. But we're at the beginning again here, folks. So anybody that you think would help really flesh out these difficult issues, let us know. And you can do that just by DMing myself or Paul, and we'll get back to you, and we'll get a chat organised with these people. It might be you, of course. So let us know if you'd like to come on the show. So thanks very much, Paul, for coming on. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
And wouldn't it be great if we, in the near future, we could actually be in the same room and do this?
Well, let's plan on that.
I think that would be pretty damn cool.
That would be a lot of fun.
Yeah. So good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for tuning in to Artefact Live with me, Scott MacArthur.
And me, Paul Crick.